Okay, welcome everybody. This is another edition of our podcast, Church in Indian Country. Today is a very important topic that we have, and that's Native Catholic education. We're going to talk about the state of what's going on now and the future and probably the past. So we have a very excellent panel with us today. So I'd just like people just to introduce yourselves. And I'm just going to go with what's on my board here on my screen. So Deacon Don Blackbird, could you tell me who you are and where you're from and your ministry?
Sure. I am Deacon Don Blackbird. I'm in the Archdiocese of Omaha. I am the principal of St. Augustine Indian Mission School on the Winnebago Reservation. I've been in this role as principal here for about 18 years. And altogether, I have 24 years in Catholic education.
My name is Colin Gortner, and I work for the Alliance for Catholic Education at Notre Dame. I help out with the communication efforts for AICSN, as well as a few other initiatives. I work with Will Newkirk and Sister Kathleen within ACE, who are both excellent role models, and also Dr. Brian Collier, who's also on this call, has been a really influential role model in my life. So I'm grateful for him.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I was a former director of the American Indian Catholic Schools Network, and fortunately, wiser people took it over, like Will Newkirk and Colin. And I also was a Catholic school teacher at a native school in Santa Fe, St. Catherine's Indian School, from 1995 until it closed in 1998. And I decided to go get a PhD and study why Catholic native schools were closing at such a rapid rate in that era. And everyone said, you'll never work in that field. And turns out there was a lot of work to be done. And so I've been involved in some way or another in the field since 1995. And so thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dr. Brian. Okay, Brother Dylan.
Hi, I'm Brother Dylan Perry. I'm a De La Salle Christian brother, and I'm the principal of De La Salle Blackfeet School in Browning, Montana on the Blackfeet Reservation. I just started here this year, but I've been involved in Catholic education in various ways for about 10 years. So a little bit before I joined the brothers, actually. And just really excited to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. I think everybody knows Father David, but you want to introduce yourself again?
Father Bailey, Father Mike and I are co-hosts of this podcast. I'm a parish priest in the Diocese of Tyler in Northeast Texas. Our southern border is not very far away from the Alabama-Coshada Indian Reservation. And of course, our northern border is Oklahoma. I spend quite a bit of time in Oklahoma with various tribes in the eastern half of the state. I also do spend quite a lot of time in southeastern Montana amongst the Northern Cheyenne people primarily, also some of the Crow, and time over in South Dakota with a lot of the Lakota as often as I'm able to. I've been working in various capacities as an advocate for Native issues since I'd say about 1995. And I'm always happy to be here and happy to be had. So.
Very good. Thank you, Father David. Okay, you mentioned before, our panelists mentioned before, the American Indian Catholic Schools Network. Make sure I get the title right. I notice when occasionally people call me because they get all these fundraising letters from their people's development departments, and they ask me if this Catholic school is good or should I send money to them. I always tell them to look for the American Indian Catholic Schools logo and part of their network, just because they're the elite of the native schools. So I just want to talk about the network, what it does, its history, why it's such an excellent network, and kind of an explanation of it. So I just throw it out to everybody who wants to join in. What is the American Indian Catholic Schools Network?
So the American Indian Catholic Schools Network is a collaboration of American Indian Catholic schools from across the country. We have representatives from the Northern Plains, the Central Plains, the Southwest, and we're hoping to expand that collaboration to include eventually all American Indian Catholic schools. And our network came together because we discovered that at one point in time we had a common funder that we were receiving grants from in the early days, and we approached that funder and asked them if they would be willing to fund a gathering of all these different Catholic Indian mission schools to allow us to get to know each other and to share kind of the best practices that each of us were doing at that time. So at that time, we had people receiving grants from them in language acquisition, counseling for Native American children, historical storytelling and preservation of tribal history. And so there were many different topics that we were all working on, and we wanted to share what we were doing well and how we could learn from one another. And so our first gathering happened in Omaha, Nebraska, with the assistance of Creighton University. And at that gathering, the 5 schools at that time realized that there was a lot that could be gained by continuing to collaborate together and to work together. And we realized we didn't need to be competing against each other for resources, but we could be collaborating together for resources and then learn from one another's experiences as well. So from there, the network continued to grow. And Brian Collier, who's on this call, Dr. Brian, he helped. I believe he was sitting on the board for the one who was providing the funding for our gathering at that time. And he also happened to be associated with the Alliance for Catholic Education at Notre Dame. And so when the early schools in the network decided on one initiative they wanted to approach, it was professional development for all of our educators to help grow them in their ability to teach Native youth. And the Alliance for Catholic Education was very uniquely and highly qualified to provide that. And so Dr. Collier worked with us to form that relationship with the University of Notre Dame and the Alliance for Catholic Education. And from there, we've continued to grow our network, to add more schools to our collaborative, to focus on professional development and sharing best practices across the network schools, and to really learn from the Alliance of Catholic Education some of the best practices that are out there for educational instruction and assessment. And that kind of brings us to where we are today as we continue to focus on developing relationships between our membership schools and really supporting one another in the ministry of Catholic Native American education or Catholic Indian education, which has definitely many unique challenges that are faced by our schools.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be at that meeting at Creighton as well, and just really by happenstance that we got to be there, and it seemed like such a good idea, especially since I had spent my years as an academic sort of thinking about ways that the Native schools could be self-governed and self-run with their own Native standards and Native community standards, and also with their own diocesan standards and ways of doing things. And so it was really wonderful to see people sharing ideas and the things that they did have in common at that early meeting. And then I would also say that it's just been a privilege for Creighton. I know it was a privilege for them. They mentioned it several times, and then for Notre Dame to be able to sort of be the brand and the name and the institution behind a lot of the good work that the schools are doing. And that affiliation sort of allows the schools sometimes to connect through a place with well-known resources. And that has been really an honor for the institutions to serve the schools in this particular manner. I always like to say that the American Indian Catholic Schools Network is fulfilling the Church's first promise on this continent, which was to provide education for Native peoples.
Yeah, and I would just add one, I think, powerful line from our mission statement that emphasizes and sort of reinforces what Deacon Don, Brother Dylan, and Dr. Collier were just saying is this: aspiring to empower Native American Catholic schools to provide unparalleled education to their local community. I think that theme of empowerment is behind a lot of what we do. And I would also like to add on that Deacon Don was mentioning our desire to continue to expand, and some exciting news is that just earlier this year, in the beginning of 2023, we added St. Anthony's Indian School to the network, which serves the Zuni Pueblo in New Mexico. The principal there is Sister Marcia Moon, and they're just a wonderful school community. So we're really happy to be partnering with them.
And also just a little plug for the network. I presume they can go on the Notre Dame ACE website and find out the website for the network. especially if they want to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars. That'll be a good thing for them to do. Oh, very good. Yes. Notre Dame ASA website, just go to where the network is, and you get more information. Okay, I want to talk about what is the greatest obstacle in your ministry on Catholic education? What's the native Catholic education? What's the greatest obstacle that you guys found in your various ministries on this education ministry?
Well, I think when we look at the question of the greatest obstacles to Native American Catholic education, it's a multi-pronged issue that has to be addressed. So when we talk about obstacles, first and foremost to Catholic education in general, we have to talk about access to resources for those Catholic schools that serve under-resourced and underserved communities, whether they be Native American communities, rural communities, inner city communities. Anybody who's in the ministry of Catholic education will tell you that the work is vital, but the resources are few. And so one obstacle facing us continues to be gathering of resources, availability of resources on American Indian reservations. It's particularly true that we're often isolated from larger communities, urban centers, and things like that. So it's even harder for us to access resources, not only dollars, but in terms of teaching staff and personnel and things of those nature that are simply not available to us because of our distance from population centers. Which was done historically on purpose to Native American people. The other obstacles we face are, of course, challenges that come in many cases with reservation communities. There's instances that have developed on reservations because of that system of poverty, drug and alcohol addiction, damage to home life, things like that. There are traumas present on those reservation communities that many educators face on a daily basis, and it's especially true when you come from a community that is struggling with all those things, almost multiplied, it seems like. And I would say right now, finally, the third point, the thing that we're facing as Native Catholic education is the historical trauma visited upon Native American people, especially by those claiming to be agents of the Catholic Church and to do her work. It has built distrust, I think, in many of the communities between the Catholic Church and the Native American community. The stories we've seen in recent time of the discovering of bodies at boarding schools, that definitely had a earthquake rippling effect through, I think, Catholic schools in our country, as people who have always been reliant, or I should say parents who have been supportive of our schools in the past have had to take a step back because of the pressure they're facing in their own tribal communities about why they continue to support the Catholic Church when these historical incidences are coming forward. So these historical abuses have come to light, and even though they may not have occurred presently or recently, it's still recent enough in the memory of the people, in the memory of parents and grandparents who were exposed to that trauma, that there's a lot of healing that needs to be done there, which is why earlier when I was speaking about the American Indian Catholic Schools Network, we have this initiative for professional development for our teachers and for our staff. But one of the other areas we focus on very heavily right now is truth and healing, to reveal the truth of what happened at many of the Indian boarding schools, especially our Catholic Indian boarding schools here in the United States, to acknowledge abuses and traumas that may have happened, to bring those to the light, to bring about justice. So we're advocating for that work and to advocate for healing for the people who may have been traumatized or hurt by those acting as agents of the church, but also to work as advocates through the network, advocating the bishops and the wider Catholic community for them to grow an awareness of these instances and to support the work of trying to heal the local communities and really to rebuild the trust so that the work of Christ can be completed in these communities once we're able to heal the wounds and damage done by the people acting as agents of the church.
Very good. One of the aspects, and we've talked about this earlier in an earlier podcast, is learning from the past, that when these abuses happen, that we do something differently. And that's one of the great advantages of the network is that they've learned from the past, and they do have a very clear example of what they want to do in the future, learning about the mistakes done to make sure they don't happen again. So it becomes very important. Anybody else wants to jump in here? Just to go ahead and talk.
Yeah, thanks so much, Deacon Don. That's when in preparing that question, I came up with the exact same points. The fund, resources, trauma, and restoration concerns. And so just to highlight some of the intersection I see with that further complicates the issue. As you alluded to, I think Native Catholic education issues are the same problems as all Native issues. It tends to be a justice issue that's hidden, that people don't talk about much, that's intentionally removed from and remote in the broader American experience. And so that's a distinct challenge in getting people to be concerned about and to care about the issues that we're working on addressing and working with. And the trauma of our communities, both the historic trauma and the ongoing trauma, require then a very specific expertise on the part of our faculty and staff that is, again, even harder to get that expertise in the communities that we're a part of. And so that's why, I'm helping to run a school that serves 60 students, and we have a full-time counselor and a lot of restorative practices training and all kinds of things that emotional first aid and all kinds of things that our teachers need that I think in other communities wouldn't need quite the same kinds of resources to serve such a small population. So the what's necessary to do this work well, which all of our students deserve for this work to be done really well, is really specific and vast. And so that's I think a big challenge is getting the teachers and then getting them the expertise that they need to go about this work in a way that's properly restorative and healing, to use Deacon Don's words. Thanks.
And I think Colin Gortner, published an article about this in the summer of 2020 in the Journal of the West. And he talked a little bit, I like that I'm going to talk for Colin about his article. But he talked a little bit about both dealing with the historical trauma and also sort of weighing that with the reality of the schools that they're in today being very different from the ones of the past. And so coming to terms with there were these harder and terrible experiences in the past for Native people, and yet Native people now send their kids by choice to these Catholic schools associated with the network and other places.
So talk a little about your parish community. I presume that all of you have a parish community. How do you build support, not only with your parish community, but also with the wider diocese and the wider church?
In my experience, our connection to our parish, which is just across the street, so we're able to have our students regularly involved in the life of the parish. Our connection to the parish is really helpful specifically in giving us, I think, credibility within the community. We've only existed for 20 years. The members of the parish invited the De La Salle brothers to come and start the school. And so that very invitation, I think, gives us some credibility with the community, but an ongoing relationship to trusted leaders and members of the community, I think, make us a trusted provider of education in a way that if we came in or even if we were invited but didn't have that ongoing relationship with those gatekeepers within the community, then we wouldn't necessarily be able to do our work very effectively.
Interesting.
And I think one of the things to remember with the history of it is that several of the schools don't have parishes. In the 1880s, 1890s, the federal government was giving money to people that missions that would start schools, and so the bishops abandoned their practices in that brief era until about the 19 teens and 20s. So the rule had been prior to the 1890s, build the parish, then the school. And since the federal government was giving money to groups that would build the schools for Native folks, they allowed exemptions. The bishops allowed exemptions. And so several of the Native schools got built without a parish. And then the parish didn't necessarily follow in due time. And so they had to connect themselves with other parishes or just with the religious order that founded them. And so it is a kind of unique situation in Catholic education out there.
Thank you for bringing that up, Brian. That's very true. I know a lot of our member network schools did not start with a parish, and actually the parish grew out of the missionary work done on behalf of the schools. For us here in Winnebago at St. Augustine's, our school was founded by St. Catherine Drexel, but the thing that made it possible for her to come here and build our mission was there was a small dedicated Native American Catholic community that was here in this area, and they are the ones who approached the Bishop of Omaha to ask for a priest to be sent here. They approached him to ask for St. Catherine, or they asked him to send somebody, and St. Catherine answered the call of coming here to build the school. And the parishioners provided the land for the school to be built. So they provided the land for the school and the parish to be built. So without their desire to see the faith grow in here in the community, we would never have had the invitation for missionaries to come in and do the work, and we never would have had the land available to build what would eventually become our facility. And even going further than that, down through the time we have here now in Winnebago, our parish really relies on our mission and our school in order to be sustained. But then the heart of the parish is its people, and they sustain the work in the ministry that's done in the school. They really reach out to support the teachers and to be present with the children. And I know for us, and it is this way for several of our network schools and others as well, the children who come to our school, only about 35% of them are actually Catholic, and the rest of our students are not Catholic students. So we have a very high non-Catholic population who comes to our school, and it's the community who sees the value of the education that's being offered. And in the word of our parents, the main reason they choose to send the parents choose to send their kids here is because we have faith and we have God in our school. And for Native American people, God and spirituality, that always has come first. And to see that put in a prominent place, that is the driving factor that sends family or has families send their kids to our school. And we even see then elders from our parish community who attend our school masses, and our students build relationships with these elders and sit with them at mass and pray with them at mass. And so it becomes a very familial relationship between the parish and the school. And we even have some of our non-Catholic students who come to the school, who learn about the Catholic faith, are embraced by the parish community and by the family of those parishioners, who then request or ask their family if it's okay for them to get baptized and to come into the church. And so we see children who are not Catholic come up in the faith, decide to become Catholic. And we even have a young man right now in seminary who came into the faith that way. He was invited in through relationship with parishioners and is now in the seminary to become a priest. So I think without having, if we're very blessed and fortunate to have both a parish and a school, a symbiotic relationship is necessary for the balance to sustain the spiritual growth of our kids, but also the well-being of our schools.
That was well said, Deacon Don. I'll move on to the idea of Native cultures. We've worked on this for the last 7 years here at the national level, but really talk about how do we teach about Native cultures, not only with the Native schools, but also with the Catholic schools in general throughout the country. That's always been a concern and a problem, not only with Native schools, but also with African Americans, and talking about their culture and their narrative. But I just want to throw the question out to you. How do you teach about your local Native cultures in your schools?
So here in Montana, we're lucky that Montana requires a Native Studies curriculum. And so we have resources developed for both general Native Studies required by the state, and then out of that, Blackfeet resources. We maintain a good relationship with the community college near us. And we're able to take our students to lots of cultural events and different things. Our 8th graders just this morning went to see a bison being harvested, and so learned about the process, the historical process of how that is done, and how that fits in with their culture, which is hugely important to many Native peoples, but Blackfeet especially. And so we also include language, so try to include the Blackfeet language in a lot of our instruction and visuals around the school. I think a lot of ways that we try to incorporate, as well as our spirituality. We're also blessed that the Blackfeet have for a long time considered themselves to be very Catholic, and so they see clear connections between Blackfeet spirituality and Catholic practice. I think we owe that to the Jesuits who initially catechized the area, who have always been good at adapting practice to the cultures that they're a part of, or ministering to. So we're blessed in a lot of ways to be able to incorporate those things into our school day.
Let me jump in real quick regarding your comment. I want to reaffirm what you said about the state of Montana and their Department of Education. The Native American Education Office through the state of Montana's Department of Education, I would go so far as to say I think they're the model of how it should be done. They're not only their requirements, but also their resources that they utilize to make sure that everybody in Montana has a suitable amount of awareness of local Native history, as well as cultural appreciation. And I think they do great work. I was very blessed last year, and supposedly I will be again this year, but I was a speaker at a conference at Chief Dull Knife College in Lanebeer on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, and 2 of their representatives came down and did presentations, and I was so blown away at like I said, their resources, their material, but also the great work that they do in making sure that the state of Montana is, that they do great work. I think a lot of people could really learn by their example, in my opinion.
I would echo that as well. When it comes to the work that's been done in Montana, I think when the network first formed many years ago, one of the key things that we built the network on was this belief in the value of Native American culture in the curriculum. And not all of the schools who wanted to come into the network had that. And it wasn't because of their lack of desire to have it. They just didn't come from the Native community, and they had they were uncomfortable with being the ones to try to bring it in, because they felt it was the community who should be providing that information. And there was also the obstacle of who's going to teach that and who's going to create it. And some of the early work done by the network before it even took on the formal name of the American Indian Catholic Schools Network was to work with people out of Montana and Alaska to create some cultural norms and curriculum, and to use the work that they were doing and they were developing at that time, even to help our schools and our membership schools bring the local Native culture into the curriculum. So that was some of the early work we did to try to help our Catholic schools be able to feel more comfortable with in bringing the culture into the schools. And here in Winnebago at St. Augustine's, we actually reside right with 2 reservations side by side. The Winnebago people who were forced relocated here from Wisconsin, and the Omaha people who have been here for about 600 years on the plains or so. And so our school serves both the Omaha and the Winnebago people. And so we have both a Ho-Chunk or Winnebago language and culture teacher here on staff who works with the staff, as well as an Omaha language, culture and language instructor, so that we can offer both tribal, teachings and language to the kids in a way that is faithful to the teaching of the tribal people or to the native people from where it comes. So that's how we try to address that, is we try to get the local community into the school. And I know a lot of our network schools are trying to do more to get local Native American people who are educators into their schools to help not only teach the culture and language, but to be general classroom instructors and to put a real presence in the classroom and show the kids what education can do, and to be role models for their own futures.
This has been an excellent discussion, and we could probably take a couple more hours with it, but because I'm just so concerned about time, I'll move on to a related question, and that's Native identity and Catholic identity. We have Bishop Wall and Bishop Zawinski, who's our chair of the subcommittees, have both talked about this, the importance of being both Native and Catholic, and there's not mutually exclusive. So I talk about that. How do you guys bring in both Native identity and the Catholic identity together?
But as a Catholic deacon, one of the challenges I faced as a young man was the struggle between my Native identity as an Omaha man and my Catholic identity. And that caused a lot of friction and stress within myself as I tried to come to terms with what does it mean to be Omaha? What does it mean to be Catholic? Because from what I was hearing in my community at the time was, you can't really be both. It was, if you were Catholic, you were selling out your traditional ways. And if you were following your traditional ways, can you be authentic in your Catholic faith? And what I've learned through my formation and growing up and reaching out and learning more about the faith, and then my formation as a deacon, there is not the barrier that many people presume or try to place in front of you. There is, again, the very core of the Native identity is that faith and spirituality in our Creator God. For the Omaha, our deity is Wakanda, and theologically speaking, Wakanda basically meets the understanding of the Holy Spirit within the Catholic Church. So God, being God, has already revealed himself in his infinite goodness to my people anyways, in his personhood. And so to know that the Omaha teachings, the Omaha values are very much in line with actually the Catholic Church's teachings on social values and how we're supposed to be treating one another, and just the core tenets of one supreme God. Those were all present in the Omaha belief system prior to contact even with Christianity. And so to see that God, and in the Catholic Church, we talk about how God reveals himself to the peoples in such a way. So for me, there's not this disparity between the Catholic identity and the Native identity, that a person can be both Native American and Catholic. And indeed, we try to infuse Native prayer systems and Native values and show our kids just how much those align with what the Catholic Church teaches about values, and also what the Catholic Church does to worship, especially utilization of cedar in place of our incense, explaining, the thurible and the feather, and by respecting and elevating Native American teachings, it doesn't diminish the teachings of the Catholic Church. It enhances how God wants to show himself to us. So that's how we try to approach it.
Very good. Well said.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the word in the Omaha language, Wakanda. Of course, there's a relationship or a connection, I suppose, between Omaha and the Ponca, both of whom speak a Siouan language. And it's interesting because Wakanda, which sounds very similar to the Lakota Wakantanka, which, as Father Mike and I discussed in one of our previous episodes, can be described as the biggest, most holiest, most sacred thing that whichever could possibly be big and holy and sacred, which in an interesting way is very comparable to our word, or the root of our word, omnipotent. He is above all creation, above all that is possible. It's the same meaning, but it's also the same concept. In other words, to say Native people very definitely saw and do see a God creator in ways which are very definitely comparable to the Catholic faith.
I think for me, an approach that's always been important, even just with catechesis in general, is an integration across disciplines, across curriculum, and across our different ways that we do things. And so I think the same approach to for us incorporating Blackfeet traditional ways and Blackfeet culture and spirituality into what we do is of the same importance. And we don't keep religion to religion classes. We don't keep Native studies to Native studies classes. We bring the language and then talking about these things in a way that both are sort of the norm of how we operate. So making sure that the way that we talk about these things is consistent and brought in throughout everything that we do. I'd also mention that so I benefit from the wisdom of a couple hundred years of missionaries working with Native populations all over the world, and so I also draw from my brothers who work in Papua New Guinea and Australia and Thailand and things. And so we're used to working with and working in Palestine and things. So working with non-Catholic areas and being authentically Catholic, even if that's not the population. And I think that idea also is really important, that we teach because we're Catholic, not because they are. And I think that helps us to have that strong identity and then be really comfortable with incorporating and talking about the other multiple identities that are part of the communities that we're ministering to.
That's a great distinction. I like that line. We teach because we're Catholic, not necessarily because they are. That's really good.
I'll just say briefly that Katie Ward, who's a 2019 Notre Dame graduate, wrote a thesis titled "The Formation of Identity and Culture in Native American Catholic Schools." You can still find this online, but it's a really interesting look at the ways in which a few of our AICSN schools are integrating Catholic and tribal spiritualities in their physical classroom spaces, in their curriculum, and their religion courses. It's a very interesting paper and might be worth checking out if you're interested in these topics.
Okay, this is a time for the plug. See, when we have people listening to this or watching this, they're going to bring out their checkbooks. And we talked about earlier the problem with the resources, that we don't have enough resources for our Catholic schools. So why would somebody want to give to Native Catholic schools in general, but to your school specifically?
This was the church's original promise to indigenous communities when Europeans arrived on this continent, was to continue education, not just in the Native way, but also in the Catholic way on the continent. And the church has promised this, and we have an obligation as members of the church, as being the church, to fulfill that promise.
Question, more specifically, why should people give to your school as opposed to many of the schools, whether they be Catholic or otherwise, which very unfortunately use what I would consider to be cultural exploitation by way of earning funds. For example, those schools that utilize what some people would call poverty porn, showing how bad things are on the reservation. And so if you send us money, you're doing something to help the problem. And yet a lot of times the money doesn't actually go to benefit the community in any way whatsoever. So as opposed to those kinds of schools, what are the good things that the schools that you guys are affiliated with are doing for the community, by way of continuing Father Mike's opportunity for a plug there?
Thank you for that frame, Father David, because my development director is might be mad at me, but he'll understand. So I would say I don't want you to give to our school. Certainly if you feel inclined, please do. I want you to visit. I think that when we participate in the mission of Christ, and for us in the ongoing mission of John Baptist de La Salle, to be with the poor, to be with those who find themselves on the margins or in poverty. So what I would want for people to do is come and be with us, to spend some time with us. An additional piece of our ministry is to offer an immersion program that I would mispronounce if I tried to do it in Blackfeet, but it translates to come and see. And we have high school groups and college groups that come and spend a week in our community, learning about Native and Blackfeet issues, spending time with our students, and helping out in school, but primarily coming to see what it's really like, not giving money to feel good about helping out people, but really being in relationship, which I think is what the mission of the church is really about. So that's what I would encourage, is to actually to get involved and to come and see what our schools are about.
I would echo what Brother Dylan was saying about the relationship and seeing when you and for me it's hard to I guess separate this out, but as an educator, a lifelong educator, when you see the joy in a child's eye, that makes your day worth it. You can deal with 100 horrible things in a day, but one little kid smiling at you and telling you a joke, that makes the whole day better. But that might just be an elementary educator talking, and that's why we do what we do. But I would so beyond echoing the come and see, because once you come and see and you encounter the children and the families we serve, you see that beauty and you want to be part of that story, and to really invest in the life of those children. But more so than that, one commitment we've made, and we've asked all other American Indian Catholic schools to make, is that we don't sell stories of despair. We want to focus on the hope. We want to focus on the self-determination of our Native American people. We want to focus on the positive things that are happening in our communities. So for us in Winnebago, we like to tell the story about why people choose to come to our school: to get a quality, high value Catholic education, to get something that's rooted in faith and spirituality, to show that our kids not only grow academically and spiritually, but they go on to become leaders in the community. Many of the leaders in the community we serve are graduates of our school system. We want to show that we're not hanging on by our bootstraps, but that we are trying to work with our local Native community to expand and grow our programming. So some of the things we've done with that is we have the first Nature Explorer outdoor classroom on an Indian reservation, which we built on our campus to incorporate native plants, spiritual plants like sage, cedar, sweetgrass, things like that, where the local community can actually come and gather those plants when they need them, so that they're available to them. They don't have to go out and hunt for them. They can come here to campus and get those things they need for their own prayer life, to teach our kids how to pray with those things, to teach our kids about the traditional way that those plants were gathered and used for medicines, and have local people come in and teach that. So it's not about selling, oh, it's so horrible. It's like, yeah, things might be troublesome, but there's so much beauty and grace here that when you contribute to our schools, you're investing in our ability to help preserve that way of life and to help those children grow into the leaders of tomorrow, and to do so in a Christ-centered environment in a very faith-filled way.
That's so awesome, man. Thank you for sharing that. That's so encouraging to hear. Such a great approach. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think hope makes a better message than despair. And I think it's for any development department that they need to be in the process of selling hope. I just have one for the question is, and I want to end this on a high note. What is our future for Catholic Native education? To throw out to anybody who wants to talk about the future. Where are we going with Catholic Native education?
I've had the opportunity to work in several different contexts, in urban and rural, and in several different cities throughout the country, with lots of different populations. And as I think about the purposes of Catholic education and the purposes of education in general, I think that certainly what our parents want, what our, I think what eventually our students learn to want for themselves is human flourishing. We want, I say to my students, I probably stole from somewhere, to be happy, healthy, and holy, and to understand what those things mean. And to do that, we've got to get away from teaching young people what to think, and we've got to get back to teaching them how to think. I think a good liberal arts education that we're getting away from in the country with an overemphasis on STEM and job preparedness in a way that gets them away from being whole human beings. And so I lean heavily on the writing of John Henry Newman and thinking about what the purposes of Catholic education are, and it's to make people not workers or machines. And that's hard in impoverished areas where people do need to be able to be marketable and be career ready, but to teach them that that's not the purpose of an education, that rather to find a vocation, to have a sense of meaning in your life, things that they have to determine for themselves, and we need to give them the skills to be able to do, rather than telling them what we think is best for them.
I think it's a really exciting time for American Indian Catholic schools, in that we're on the precipice of real change, with some of the schools expanding and some of the schools adding buildings, and some of the schools really finding their niche and learning how to navigate both their native identity and being a Catholic school. And I think the future looks like all the Catholic Indian school records are in limbo in the moment, and there's a great group of archivists and others working to try to figure out the best way to make sure Native people have best and first access to those records. And what we just saw with the Holy Father in Canada, talking with the Native schools and apologizing on behalf of the church for the horrible things that happened, is also a good movement forward as we sort of talk about truth and making sure that these stories are appropriately told. And I think, that the adage that the truth will set you free is so true, because when people hear that the church is paying attention and listening and really moving with the Spirit, I think that's when we will see the continued growth of these Catholic Indian schools in the United States. And they'll have the power to continue to govern themselves in ways that are appropriate in their own communities. And that, to me, is real hope.
I would agree with Dr. Brian Collier that it is an exciting time, not just with Catholic Native Ministry, but our Catholic educational ministry, but in Catholic Native ministry in general. A lot of it is empowerment, is getting the voices of natives themselves to run the ministry, and it's been very powerful, very, very important. I know we're quickly running out of time, so I just want to give a chance for Father David, my co-partner in these podcasts, if you have anything to say or any other questions that you have.
I think by now you should know that I always have something to say. But obviously we are running out of time, so I don't really have time to go into it. But I really want to ask everyone that's a part of this. And first of all, I want to thank you all for being a part of it and for all the things that you've shared. I'm really excited about this conversation. But I'd like to ask all of you in about let's see. We're good on topics up to what, August? Is that right, Father Carson? So maybe in August, I'd like to ask you guys to reconvene, and maybe we can invite Father Peter and Father Brad from Red Cloud Indian School, and maybe my good friend Seto Watts, Professor Burt Medicine Bull from Chief Dolnef College. I'd like for us to reconvene and do a part 2 on this, talking about solutions, but specifically, and this is why I'm thinking of my good friend Burt Medicine Bull, to talk about how we as Catholics and the Catholic Indian Schools Network can work on language integration, and by which I'm talking about total immersion clinics that are possible. I know that Brother Dylan is fortunate there in the Blackfeet Reservation, due to the fact that the Pagani Institute, founded by the late great Blackfeet Daryl Robes Kip, he founded that institute to with the idea that total immersion of languages is really the only way that it's going to be brought back from extinction. And I think if, as Father Carson and I discussed in the episode we did with Bert Medicine Bowl, one of the things that I said was, one of the things that we can do to undo or to counter the damage that we did in the restriction of languages and our participation in cultural genocide is to help bring back the languages that we initially tried to repress. So language integration and total immersion language programs is something I would love for us to discuss, as well as other solutions in a future episode. So again, thank you to all of you for being a part of this. And please consider here in a few months, 4 or 5 months, however long it is, to make time for your schedules to reconvene and let's discuss that further.
I think it's a very important point and certainly a very good idea. So yeah, we need to reconvene just because there's so many issues and concerns that we just can't do this in just one podcast. But I'm excited about it. I also echo Father David is thank you for all your good work and also being part of our podcast, talking about Catholic Native education. And we continue to support all of you and all your ministry. And again, for the Catholic Indian Schools Network, that you can find them on the Notre Dame webpage from ACE. Just scroll down, talks about schools on the network and the great things they're doing. So I just wanted to maybe give you guys a blessing. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, Holy Spirit. Bless you, Lord God. We ask you to send down Holy Spirit upon all of you to be with you and bless you, especially during this great Easter season that we always look forward to being graced by Christ and also to have the power of Christ in our ministry. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit.